broken tooth all weekend. We didn't get anything.
Yeah.
Just
Is it so? It's 6:30. Let's start the meeting. Thanks for coming. Let's see. So there's no change in the agenda, so there's no action for approving the agenda to start with, right? Okay. So let's move on to the Pledge of Allegiance. We are blessed to be able to have Crimson Point Elementary School here to help us with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Okay, real quick before we go, I just want to introduce our kindergarten teachers who are here with these guys, Miss Ryan, Miss Spivak, and Miss Piper, the amazing kindergarten teachers at Crimson Point. And we have a couple representatives from their class and then a couple of our older student future leaders to help us. And so here we are, Crimson Point, with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We are proud.
Hey, thanks, guys. They all do a different thing on this pledge or go at the end and they start on the roller coaster.
good job.
Thanks. Yeah, you're fine. Thank you.
That's pretty cool. Thanks for coming. Communications and celebrations. Superintendent Wendy Johnson.
Not on.
Trustees, thank you. Thank you, kindergarten teachers and students and Principal Jensen. As I stated at our last meeting, we have re-implemented the Kuna way, and and I just wanted to present some of the highlights from the submissions. So you wouldn't mind going to the next slide? You can go to the next slide. So as you know, we have had quite a few challenges within our operations teams, and we wanted to highlight our transportation team for going above and beyond. Also our child nutrition team. And in this picture, you can see there are 3 people. Typically in this situation, we have 5 to 6 people working, and so 3 people are doing the work of 5 to 6. In the next picture, you'll see some of our volunteers. You see who I am very proud of, a former student, Sarah Williams, is there volunteering her days off to come help us in making sure we could feed our children. So I wanted to really give a shout out to our transportation and child nutrition team. I won't go through all the individual submissions, but they're there for you. Each of the people that has been nominated will receive a certificate from the school district, thanking them for going above and beyond. Thank you. We have good people, and I'll just continue on if you wouldn't mind, and update you on a technology grant and another grant that we received kind of at the last minute, so we added it to the list. Our new technology director, who is in the audience somewhere, I saw him. He applied for the Emergency Connectivity Fund grant, and we received over $1.1 million to go for towards Chromebooks and some of the connectivity issues that we have had within our school district. So the good news is we had set aside $310,000 within our ESSER funds to pay for additional Chromebooks. This fund will help us to pay for those Chromebooks, so that gives us more money within our ESSER funds. And we have a proposal for you tonight to consider. So almost $1.2 million to continue to help our efforts for one-to-one devices within our school district to help us not only navigate the challenges of COVID, but also getting our children prepared for the future. It allows us to do that. And then we'll talk more about this other grant here shortly, but we received, as a part of the governor's attempt to help us with our operational challenges, a substitute and operation recruitment grant. We have already been approved for over 92,000. We believe we're going to get an additional 92,000 kind of to match that in November. And the focus of these monies is to help us not only recruit additional people into our system to help us fill the needs that we have, but also to retain our existing personnel. And we'll talk more about that in just a moment. And then the third item in the update is just our continued practice of linking all of the communications, the written communications from patrons. And we won't go through all of those. They're linked on the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go on to the reports and the update on the Avid implementation with Assistant Superintendent Kim Beckendall.
Chairman Grant and trustees, I'm not going to take up too much time because I don't want to steal the thunder of the folks from Ross, but I just want to give you a little bit of a background. I think it was 3 summers ago, I had the great fortune of traveling with these ladies when we were able to go to a summer institute in Seattle. And we had a wonderful time. And I think that time just really bonds you together with people when you travel. But it's been just so great for me and for Wendy when we've, over these last 2 years, to go over to Ross and just see what they've been doing with Avid, to go into every classroom and just see some of the strategies and things that they are doing. And just the kids, how marvelous it is. So it's been just a great experience to be able to do that. And also to be able to take our other administrators over to Ross to say, this is what it looks like in a classroom. And this past summer, as you know, we were able to have 2 different of our workshops here because they didn't have any summer travel, but they came to us. And we had a 3-day workshop in July, and we had every one of our elementary schools represented. And then in August, we had another 2-day training, and that was both of our middle schools, had their 6th grade teachers there, and then any of the elementary teachers that weren't able to go in July. So we've covered a great group of staff in our schools, from all of our elementary schools up to our 6th grade and their middle schools right now. And so with that, I'm going to let Misty Schmidt, the principal at Ross, and the teachers that she brought with us, talk a little bit more about what Ross has done as leaders in our Avid initiative. And then if you have any questions, like where are the other schools, I'm happy to answer that too.
Okay, thank you for welcoming me back, Chairman Grant and members of the board. Last time I spoke to you guys was a couple years ago when we were new in this journey. And at that time I shared I'd only seen Avid at the high school level, and I knew it was good for kids, and so we wanted to try it at the elementary level, which is why we explored it and then ultimately implemented it. And thankfully for your guys' support and the leadership and partnership with the district office with Superintendent Johnson, we've been able to do really awesome things with Avid. And so I'm excited to be here to share some of that with you tonight. And then it is a team effort to support our students with Avid. And so I brought a couple of teachers and as well as our instructional coach, and they've been kind of early adopters. They've been like implementing with fidelity. They've been like really leading on this. So I want to give them each a chance to speak as well. But just to give a couple of the big highlights that we have, when I came to Ross and I looked at the data and really kind of dug in, where are we at? Where do we need to go? How are we going to get there? One of the things I saw is like we need more engagement for students. Our students need to be ready to learn. And so that's what some of the pictures up here are. Just some like students are really engaged. We're teaching them how to be organized, how to keep track of their learning, that student agency and ownership and accountability to take control of their lives and their learning. But in the 2 years really that we've implemented, I get like really excited when I talk about this. Our data, we've come up over 20 percentage points in ELA and almost that in math. So when some of our historical data at Ross, we were as low as the teens for reading proficiency, and we're hovering around, or for ELA proficiency, we're hovering around 50% now. So huge gains in just 2 years. It doesn't mean the work's done. That's still only 1 in 2 students. We've still got a lot to do and we're committed to it. And thankfully, you know, with the investment, we know we're gonna be able to get those returns because of what the early data is showing us after 2 years. But also with math, with our math implementation, or our math data, historically, that was even lower sometimes at Ross, and we're hovering, you know, somewhere around 40% right now, 4th, 5th grade. It's right in the middle. So again, coming up almost 20 percentage points in 2 years. I get really excited as an administrator because you never know, you know, is this going to work? Is this going to fall flat? Like these people, a lot of people have invested in our team, and we want to make sure that, you know, we're being responsible and getting them that return on the investment. And I'm just so proud of the work that the teachers have done and seeing the benefit for students. Just one more example before I turn it over to them. We have a teacher who's not here tonight. She's out sick with sick kids today. She looped with a group of students, so she had 2 years with them. And so we pulled their historical data for that cohort. When they finished 3rd grade, they were at 38% proficiency for English language arts. On the spring ISAT that they just took, after having 2 years with her, implementing those Avid engagement strategies, implementing standards-based practices in the classroom, they came in at 77% proficiency. And as I understand it, that's one of the highest in the state. So I'm just so proud of this team. And that's only that's one of our many successes. We have success across the board right now. And so I just can't thank you guys enough. And Superintendent Johnson for trusting us enough to do this and for letting us do it and for helping support with this implementation. And it's so good for kids. And I get super excited when I talk about it. And so I'm going to turn it over to teachers because I could go on and on about it. But at the end, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer. And also you guys are welcome at Ross anytime. I was hoping to get some kids here tonight, but it just didn't kind of come together. We've got one that ended up being out and different things. So, but you're welcome at Ross anytime. I'd love to take you through classrooms because really when you see it in action, it's like, wow, this is a 4th grader asking this high level question and doing their own thinking and just really highly engaged. So anyway, I'll start by introducing Renee Engel. She's one of our 4th grade teachers, and I'll give her a chance to talk about her experience.
Thanks, Misty. Chairman Grant and trustees, thank you so much for having us tonight and letting us highlight our students and their amazing progress. We really appreciate you supporting us in our Avid journey because Avid has really changed the opportunities for our students. This is my 8th year in district, my 4th year at Ross, and I was 4 years at Teed. I've taught 4th grade all 8 years in our district. My students' best performance on the ISAT and ELA was 35% before Avid. Implementing Avid and provided that framework for students with those best practices and making sure that we incorporate WICR, which is writing, inquiry, collaboration, organization, and reading in every lesson, allowed my students to achieve 58% proficiency last year. Please understand that we started Avid in 2019, 2020. My students last year had missed from March through May in the 3rd grade. They still achieved 58%. So your support and your encouragement in our Avid implementation means the world to me, that these students get to show what they can do every day. Thank you. This is Cody Sweet, also my teammate in 4th grade.
Chairman Grant and trustees, thank you so much for having us here tonight and for continuing to support Avid. This is my 5th year with the district. However, last year was my first entire year with a classroom. So I have no past data to show you as far as how my students performed. But being able to help make students successful in their learning, my proficiency was over 50% in ELA, which is a real attributed to Avid and to the hard work that they put into it. So I really appreciate the effort and continued support that you give us. And I'm going to turn it over to our instructional coach, Andrea Willitson.
Hello, like my colleague said, thank you so much. It's my 14th year in the district and 7th year as an instructional coach. I'm fortunate enough to work at 2 different schools, Hubbard and Ross. And as an instructional coach, I feel like I've had the opportunity to do a lot of learning. And Avid has given me common language with my teams, grounded in best practices. So when I'm collaborating, supporting teachers, doing coaching cycles across our school, we're speaking a common language and really leveraging best practices for our students, especially in literacy. But it translates across all the content areas. It's also a framework. It gives us that consistency and organization to allow the heavy lifting of content and rigor to occur. One thing I'd like to say, I was invited many times by the 4th grade team, as we're also digging really deeply into the new ELA curriculum. They're using Avid as a verb and avidizing their lessons and what it has done for their collaboration with that 4th grade team, they're planning, and now it's reaching out. My 3rd grade team is asking about it at Hubbard. And so those practices they're doing are coming down, which is really exciting. The other thing I'd like to say is just doing some of the learning I have, I feel like my 19-year-old missed out on some of these study skills and organizational skills. She's a head in the clouds kind of kiddo, and this would have given her some of those practices. So while she was prepared for college academically, this organization piece would have really spoken to some of her weaknesses she has. And so I'm just excited for our kids to have this opportunity. So thank you very much, and I'll give you back to Misty.
One of the last things I feel like I need to say is, like, I don't get paid by Avid to sing Avid praises, but I feel like I go around and I'm like, Avid, Avid, Avid. And the reason I do that is because I know it works for kids and I know it works well for students in their learning. And I know how much it's transformed the teachers at the school. So I'm just really excited. And one of the main things, and Ms. Engel spoke to it, is, you know, so much we see in the news about learning loss during the pandemic and backslide of kids and kids not being at grade level. And we still have a long ways to go, but it's such a proud moment to be able to stand here at the, you know, not the end of a pandemic, but at the end of a really crazy 2020, and to know that we brought kids back and did the right thing there. And our kids are benefiting from it greatly. We don't have backslide at Ross. When we tracked our student growth, we had a couple of students that didn't make as much growth, but every student had growth. And that's what we want as educators. That's what we want for all of our kids. And so just thank you truly for supporting this. And, you know, we ask for that continued support as we move forward, because it pays off. Do you have any questions?
I don't have any questions, but I do want to make a comment. I was able to go last spring and watch this, and to see the kids and the confidence they're gaining and their little cheers. And all of that was so exciting. And then to hear tonight, because I didn't know all of the scores, really makes me excited that we're going in the right direction and to continue. So I really support you guys. So thanks for your report.
Thanks for all your hard work. Okay, moving on to the consent agenda items. Is there anything in there that anyone needs to take out to discuss? Do we have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I'll make the motion that we approve the consent agenda.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor, Russ?
Aye.
Sally?
Aye.
Kim?
Aye.
Joy?
Aye.
Motion carries. Do we have any delegations or delegates that have signed up? No, okay. Unfinished business, discussion under action items, an update on the long-range capital plan. Michael Keith from Piper Sandler and Company.
Everybody hear me okay? Excellent. Gotta say, this is exciting to be at a lecture on a stage. You guys have really stepped it up this time. So again, for maybe some of those in the room, Michael Keith, Piper Sandler, as you guys know, we've been the district's underwriter for a long time. We kind of, work in concert with Christian Anderson, Zion's Bank, who is the, your financial advisor. And we've been, we presented to you guys in July to kind of talk about the, the capital plan and where we're at. And we wanted to come back and kind of update you on that a little bit now that we have market value information. We have kind of a little bit clearer picture of what kind of growth that you guys had, how that's going to impact your tax rate, and talk a little bit about how that might shift our strategy a little bit going forward because of the phenomenal growth that you guys have seen in the district in terms of your values, and felt like it was kind of worth updating that for the board this evening. So if maybe we can go through a couple slides down. No, I think we can skip that. We can go right to, there we go. Tax rates versus tax revenues. So if you remember, we had a conversation in July about that. We knew that this growth was coming, right? That, you had, your county assessor came and talked to you, and we wanted to kind of follow up in terms of impact, because you can see that your growth this year ended up being 31%, right, which is significant. And it certainly eclipses any of the years you've had in the past. And we've had multiple years now from 2020 of 28%, 2021 of 16%, and now that 31%, which is what's changing that dynamic a little bit for tax rates, right? So if you kind of rewind the clock again back to 2017, district had set out a plan that says, look, we want to bring our tax rates down, but we want to put it in a way that's sustainable for the community, that we can execute on our long-range plan, but also have something that's predictable for the community, that's not going up, it's not going down. They kind of understand what our tax rates were. And during times of moderate growth, this kind of level tax plan, when you're talking about the tax rate, works really, really well. But we've kind of shifted into a time where we've had rapid growth, right? And when we have rapid growth, it's hard to kind of sustain that tax rate for a lot of reasons. I mean, there are some built-in caps, right, that we've been up against. And so you've seen that from 2020 to 2021, your tax rate dropped 19%, right? And then from 2021 to 2022, the projected decrease is going to be 28% this year, which kind of offsets, again, that 31% increase we're seeing in the market values. And I want to put that in perspective, because I think the knee-jerk reaction to that is, oh man, our tax rate's going to come down too much, and then we can't accomplish what it is that we set out to do when we put our plan in place at the $5 tax rate. And if you look at the graph that's below that, it kind of helps put that in perspective, that in 2020, your tax collections were 11.2 million. It has come down some. That's been by design, not because your tax rate's coming down, but that's been by design in terms of how we've kind of managed your taxes at the district. And so although your tax rate has come down 28%, your tax collections, and this is the bond, I'll get to that in a sec, but your total tax collections went from 10.9 to projected to be 10.3. So it's only going down 600,000 this year. And some of that has to do with, we've paid off bond debt, service payments, we've accelerated debt, and your overall debt profile was lower this year, so you didn't need to levy as much for the bond to meet those payments. And you can see that on this slide is the debt service revenue and kind of what that's looked like. And so if you look back at 2013, your bond levy collections were at 3.2 million, right? And as we've seen this rapid growth, you've been able to go from 3.2 to, at its peak, 8.4 million. So it's increased significantly. Now, in between that, there was new bonds issued, right? And so that's part of where we needed to grow that, is because we needed to be able to service the new bonds. And now the shift in strategy is rather than focus on tax rate, because we have these high market values, let's focus on the tax levy dollars for the bond. I think, we can, and we've got some modeling we'll show you that where we can look at just an $8 million flat. So going up maybe a little bit from this year because your debt service goes up a little bit next year. But going from that 7.7 to 8 million and holding that constant, and you'll see that it provides us still a lot of flexibility for the school district. And I kind of wanted to talk that through a little bit with the board. So we kind of move to the next slide. The other thing I wanted to, let me go this way, sorry. That's okay. So while that's coming up, the other thing I wanted to be able to kind of talk about is make sure we had a good understanding of kind of the makeup of your tax base. So on this, it doesn't show the percentages, but in 2020, your taxes that teal bar that's at the top, that's new growth, right? So you had 32% of new construction that came in the market value, right? And the other 67% was revaluation. In 2021, it was split a little bit more. You had about 44% of new construction and about 55% of just revaluation of existing bonds, of your existing market values. And then in 2022, the split is 25 and 74, right? So a lot of that growth is revaluation. And that's kind of the reason why we want that tax rate to come down some, right? Because if we kept it at, say, the $5, right? Yes, the tax rate's not going up, and the new construction that's coming on the rolls kind of help offset some of those taxes. But because you have this revaluation, you can see from the tax dollar levies that we're getting that taxes are still going up. And so the conversation that we've had around that is, we want to be able to still maintain your plan, make sure that we have, sufficient funds to kind of meet the long range plans of the district as those become available and you guys talk about them, and giving you guys that same flexibility that we talked about with the $5 tax rate. But at the same time, recognizing that, there's this changing dynamic in the marketplace where we're seeing these huge revaluations, right? And that we want to be able to, make sure that we can say that growth is paying for itself and just leveraging the growth part of this and allowing, and we can look at this from a perspective of, we can grow, that dollar levy by the new construction growth, but not take, the revaluation from this. And what that does is it allows current homeowners to see their taxes do that, like remain the same, right? Yeah, where they're pretty much agnostic to the fact that, taxes have changed. It just means that, hey, look, we're certifying the same amount, except where we took new construction. And what that means from a long range perspective is that now those new people that are coming in are contributing, right? And those are the ones that are contributing to the new tax revenue. And other folks that have already been in the system paying, right, for taxes aren't seeing necessarily their taxes go up as a result of that. And if we go to the next slide, This graph is off just a little bit, but the idea here is that with a constant tax rate, our dollar levy, we'll continue to see what we're seeing happen now, right? We'll see the tax rate go down, right? And as you saw your market value went up 31%, but we saw your tax rate come down 28%, right? So we're effectively offsetting the increase by a decrease in the tax rate to try to get back to a point where we're truly not raising taxes. We're just capturing potentially the 3% or so of just its new growth that comes from that. I'm going to stop there for a sec before we kind of go into the capital plans to see if there's any questions from the board in terms of what I talked about there. Sure.
What happens if property values start to go down? Then do we find ourselves in a conundrum of tax rate having to go back up?
You do, but the same dynamic is in play, right? You're still levying the same amount of dollars. And so although the homeowner will see their market value go down, the tax bill is still the same, right? And you're just seeing the tax rate go up. So for instance, if it's a $100,000 home and they had to pay, $3,000 annually in taxes on that, and that equal to I won't be able to do the math in my head, but let's say that's a dollar tax rate that comes out, right? If that value goes down and gets cut in half, right? You're saying, well, that tax rate needs to go up back to say 1.5 to get to the same $3,000 taxes that they're paying. So ultimately, we're focused more on the dollars with that, and a long-term plan. And again, it doesn't mean we can't have any growth from that, because that was the benefit of a level tax rate, right? That if we got growth would pay for the new facilities, right? And the challenge with that, and that works really well if you have tax rates or tax market values that are only going up 2 or 3% a year, right? And that a lot of that is new construction, some of it's revaluation. Maybe taxes are going up a little bit, but that's something that can be implemented without harming existing taxpayers. But when you see a revaluation of 28% at the same level tax rate, then somebody could see their taxes go up 28%, right? And that's where homeowners are going to push back, on something like that. And so I think we want to work with the district and kind of shift that strategy again to accomplish the same plan, focusing on more of a long-term tax levy from a dollar perspective, and then look at how we can grow that over time if we need to meet your capital plan, and still kind of keep within the spirit of, look, we don't want to increase taxes, right? We want growth to pay for itself. Do that. So I've showed you this before, and I've kind of stripped out the other levies and just, again, focused strictly on the bond side of things. And so the gray bar is what was levied this year and what was needed for debt service. Going in the next year, in 2023, you can see where your debt service is at currently, and the projected $8 million tax levy that we're suggesting you hold steady. So again, you levied 7.7 this year, and then we're suggesting that, because debt service goes up a little bit this next year, that we'll push that up to 8 million, and we just hold it constant at 8 million going forward. You can see that your debt's getting shorter. So, originally your 2017 bonds matured in 2036. Currently, that's 2034. And we've taken out part of that maturity. And again, that's been part of the plan, right? With any of the excess funds that hasn't been needed for debt service, the district has utilized to pay off existing debt. And that's not a couple things. So, when we first started this conversation several years ago, at that time you had longer debt, you had more of it. And now as time has passed, we've got more flexibility than we had, say, 5 years ago, right? Because our debt's shorter, right? We've had increased market values. And so it also gives us the flexibility to kind of look at leveling that tax plan out, and just looking at 8 million. And if we go to the next slide, That essentially means the district, and this is just hypothetical numbers, but just to kind of give an upward bound number on this, that the district could issue essentially $92 million worth of bonds in 2023 under your current capacity if you kept the bond levy at 8 million. And that's selling everything at once. If we kind of go back to some of the modeling that we've done in the past where, you know, bonds are staged in, say, over 10 years, right? You stage in a bond every 3 years, depending on what that bond amount is. You know, that bond amount probably goes up to anywhere from 110 to 120 million over time, you know, under this 8 million bond structure. And this assumes it stays flat. You know, what's not in this modeling is the scenario I talked about where you take just new construction from that. And so I ran some analysis on that for just last year, would have generated $500,000 more in revenue if we just took our tax rate on the new construction part of this. And that would move that $91 million bond up almost 10 million just from taking that new construction growth on that. So again, I think there's lots of flexibility, you know, with this plan. And it gives, again, the opportunity for the tax rate to continue to come down and still meet the district's long-term capital needs. Any questions on any of that? Okay. So this slide just kind of does a historical reference for you of new construction. You can see how your new construction has accelerated quite a bit in the last three or 4 years. If you were to go back to 2013, of course, that's when we were still coming out of the recession, right? Remember that. And so there was still new construction happening, but it was at a much slower pace from, you know, 6.8 to 8.1 million. As we started to come out of that recession, though, we saw that go up 26, 29, 39 to this last year, you know, 212 million. So had we had only taken new construction at those prevailing tax rates each year, you know, it would have generated an additional $3.7 million of revenue to, again, to provide debt service for bonds, back to that notion of having kind of, you know, new construction pay for new facility needs. And at the bottom of this, I just summarized that from an average perspective, say, look, if we took average new construction of about 84 million over that period, your average tax rate of about, you know, $5.50 per 1,000, you know, you would get to annually $500,000 more, you know, in revenue going forward that would continue to grow as you got new construction. Okay, so I wanted to shift a little bit and kind of talk about elections in general, and something we haven't talked about for a while with the board. And as you guys are thinking about planning, whether that's, you know, next year or in a couple of years, whether it's your supplemental or it's a new bond, there's a couple election disclosure changes that have happened. We had one happen a couple of years ago. There's a new one this year. I want to talk about that a little bit. And I also wanted to kind of show you guys some of the election history information. I guess one of the upsides to having consolidated elections now is we have data about when, you know, what's being successful on what dates and kind of how that trend has gone since essentially 2011 when they consolidated elections. So if we go to the next slide here. So this is historically back to 2011 for bonds, and this is by date. So, and this is by success rate. The orange bar represents the amount of bonds that have been ran on that date, which you pick up from the right-hand side of the scale. And then on the left-hand side of the scale is the percentage that passed on those dates. So since 2011, March has been the most popular date, and it's had the best success rate, right? And we've seen 55% of bonds pass. As we move through the calendar year, you know, those passage rates have gone down as well as the attempts have gone down on those dates. May being the second most popular, although that's a little more challenged now that we have every other year the primaries are ran in May. So in even years, like the one we're going in, could be an additional challenge with the primary being ran. August date, some folks have ran on August. That's the other date that school districts get that other cities and counties don't have. Of course, the challenge with that is that it's summertime and it's really hard to engage with the public when everybody's on vacation, generally speaking, in the summer. And the last one is the November date. It's the least popular for a variety of reasons. You can't certify until the next year. It's why a lot of people don't run them as much in November. But again, there's a lot of things that end up being on the ballots. You also have trustee elections now that are in November. So there's other things competing with your bond in those November elections, which makes it additionally challenging in November. If you go to the next slide, this one looks at passage rates by year now. So 2011 was particularly challenging. That's the first year we shifted from when you can run elections anytime you wanted to consolidated elections. And so we saw a fairly significant decrease in 2011. And then from there, you can see that generally speaking, in the even years, outlier being maybe 2012, even years have been more challenging than the odd years, again, because those are election years.
I am so sorry, but I'm not kidding. It's just like, I feel like you're talking underwater. So I'm wondering if we move that podium here and we could hear your natural voice and then the microphone would still project out to them or something. But
Sure.
It truly is ridiculous. I mean, I thought maybe I was the only one that my hearing was going bad, but
Let's try these
it's all of us.
I don't know if the microphone.
Well, it was the same thing.
So maybe,
Maybe it's the microphone.
If you want me, I can just try talking.
Then they can't, I don't know. I'm serious. It's like hard for me to even pay attention to what you're saying because it is just underwater. It's ridiculous. I'm sorry.
Is this one better? Okay. Yeah, you bet. So as I was saying with this chart here, this just kind of lines it out by year, noticing that, again, that the odd years have been the best years for running elections, for bond elections. Even years a little more challenging. But for 2019, and again, kind of leading in the next discussion, that's when the new ballot disclosure language came into effect. And it created some confusion when voters went into the ballot boxes looking at those election disclosures relative to what districts were communicating. And we can kind of slip to the next two slides and kind of go to the final slide here. One more. This just kind of looks at the supplemental levies. So this is the two bills I was talking about. So House Bill 262, which was passed in 2018 and went into effect for 2019 elections, required school districts now to not only do you have to disclose the projected interest rate, the projected total cost of the bond, principal and interest, total cost, but now you also have to, provide this tax impact per 100,000 on the ballot. And what was happening is that, if like with Kuna School District, there was a plan that was put in place that said, hey, look, we're not going to increase your taxes, right? We're maintaining this tax rate at this level. And it's because either we're managing the bond so that we don't exceed that, or we have another levy that's coming off. None of that language was on the ballot. And so you'd have this communication out in the public. They would show up in the ballot box. They would read this and say, well, you told me there was no tax increase. And instead, what I'm reading is that it's actually going to cost me, say, $50 per 100,000. And so that created confusion. And it's also why it created some challenges for bonds passing in 2019. We were able to go back to the Secretary of State's office and get them to review that with us and allow for explanatory language, meaning that you could then put back on the ballot, hey, look, yes, here's the calculation. This is what the law says, and we're going to make this calculation. But there's these other things that are happening that's going to offset that tax rate so that at the end, you're not going to see a tax increase. Then House Bill 66 came in, and they've limited now that explanatory language that you can put on the ballot. So you can no longer, so for instance, if the district were to, say, run a plan, say that you wanted your supplemental to expire and you wanted the same dollar amount in a plan now instead, you couldn't put explanatory language on your ballot that says that, well, yes, this plant levy cost, $60 per 100,000, but our supplemental levy is going away and it costs exactly the same thing. You couldn't put that on there. The only thing they'll allow you to do is if you have a existing supplemental levy that's coming off and you're running a new supplemental levy, you can talk about those together on a ballot language, but you can't talk about any other levies. So they limited the disclosure language. They've also put into place on this that if you do not follow each of these items that have to be on your ballot language, it will invalidate your election and can be challenged. And the district does a good job of working with your bond attorneys to make sure that you have the language correct. But this did happen for 2 school districts in 2019 when the House Bill 626 first came out. Lake Ponderay School District, who actually passed their election, had a challenge because they didn't have that language on there. Now they were able to overcome that and keep their levy in place. But with the changes that they have put in House Bill 66, that same challenge wouldn't work anymore. So you effectively would have had a levy that was approved by the voters, but null and void because the proper process wasn't followed. And that means you would lose the ability to levy the tax that year. As I mostly wanted to raise this because it is a change, and as you guys are thinking about supplemental levies, you're thinking about long-term planning, this is a change that impacts that a little bit as we're thinking about those plans and communication with the public about these levies.
Makes it so that we can't talk about it in the official language on the ballot, but we can educate our community that this levy's falling off, it's going to be repeated. We can't put it in the bill or on the ballot.
I feel, wow. I feel like that actually is a good thing though, because I think that although we sit in these meetings and it's very clear to us because we've gone through this process with you, I think that other people that go to the ballot box or whatever, they feel like they got hijacked by us. And I don't want them to ever feel that, we're trying to pull a fast one or we're being dishonest in any way that, we try really hard to be transparent. So I feel like having this language on there, as far as whether this is an increase, a decrease, or a no change, those types of things, I think that's actually a good thing for the community.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think simple is better, right? The more straightforward that we can make our communication with our public, 100% agree. There are some requirements on here. So if you look at bullet number 3, that if, for instance, you're running a supplemental levy and it is an increase over the existing supplemental levy, that language has to be in there, right? And so that is a requirement. There's no requirement to talk about any of the other levies, and you can't talk about any of the other levies in this. Yes?
We go back to slide 9, I believe, the new construction values.
Absolutely.
So I guess my question on that, it's working very well, but my question on that is there any risk as far as treating new construction differently than existing construction? I mean, are we subject to, we can treat those differently without any sort of discrimination claim or without any sort of difficulty with that?
Yeah, no, good question. And so let's clarify that. So if you were only taxing a specific tax, right, on that, but that's not what we're doing, right? We're saying that our adjustment of our taxes, as we think about our market values, is we're as we see growth in the district, we'll adjust out for revaluation, but we're not going to adjust out for new construction. So everybody gets the same tax rate, right? It's just that your existing taxpayers get the benefit, the true benefit of somebody else coming on, right? And sharing in the cost of, future facilities on that. And so you're not going to have a special tax specifically for new construction. It's just that you're allowing your tax rate not to fall as much and capture the valuation. And here's the other thing I will say. That's actually how the legislature changed the approach for cities and counties this year. So if you look at the L2 and go through the calculation for new construction values, what I'm proposing here is exactly what's been proposed by the legislature, where they, cities and counties now only get 90% of new construction. But the way they have to calculate that is they have to calculate a new tax rate without the new construction in there, with the new value information. So whatever that drops by, and then that new tax levy then can be applied to the new construction, and you get that growth from that. Same concept here.
I guess that almost raises a little more question for me as far as if the legislature authorized it for cities and counties, what's the source of our authorization to do that?
Well, so they were specifically capping taxes. Your tax levies are exempt from that. Really what you guys are operating under is your 21-month levy calculations, right? So that's where you get capped at, right? So you can't just grow this forever, but you are allowed to have reserves in place. And essentially how you're taking those reserves going forward is you're calculating that based off of new construction. Rather than taking everything 1 year, you get this big, increase, where then you have to do something with it. You're just growing it by new construction only.
I'm not opposed to it. I just,
No, that's a really good question. But yeah, that's where your authority comes from to be able to do that. Any other questions? Okay. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be in front of you guys again. It's always great to kind of be able to come back in and kind of talk about the plan, see how it's going, and just kind of have a check-in with it. I think hopefully the takeaway here is that, you guys are making the right steps, right? We've been able to reduce taxes. The tax levy has come down, considerably over the years. You guys have been able to pay down debt, which has created additional savings for taxpayers. And while at the same time, you guys have still positioned yourself in a way that you can, go out for new bonds when it makes sense for the district without having to go back out for an additional increase over what you're levying today to do that. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks for your time. Okay, now we get to talk about the KSD's COVID operational plan and additional funds from the Governor Little. Superintendent Johnson.
Maybe, there we go. Chairman, Grant, and trustees. First of all, it'd be remiss not to congratulate you to see your plan actually start to bear fruit again. And the courage that it took to bring in experts to guide you in setting up not just a immediate response, to think long-term and think ahead. So that's a pretty significant drop in our rate. And that I know was very hard work and year after year reconsidering a lot of information in order to make those decisions. So on to, I was hoping we wouldn't have to do this every month, but we're kind of in a kind of round 2.5 or COVID 3.0 in our operating plans. And every week we give an update to the community on kind of where we are. So I thought instead of talking about our positive cases and all those sort of things, we'd talk about a little bit of some of the other challenges. And as I've already stated, we continue to experience major challenges with personnel, in particular substitutes, bus drivers, custodians, and child nutrition. And these teams that already work for us have been incredible at stepping up and helping. Substitutes, it's teachers covering, it's paras covering classes, it's volunteers, bus drivers are helping each other. We're getting some volunteers to help with that. Same with custodial and child nutrition. We really wouldn't be able to make it, keep our doors open to children if it hadn't been for the amazing personnel that we have in place. So I'm really grateful for our community and our team. So some interesting data that we started sharing with you last year has to do with our substitutes. And I've had quite a few people like, well, why is it so different this year? And we looked at some of our data. So as we started sharing this with you last year, the information in green on the slide is I keep referring to it as our last normal year, even though it wasn't fully a normal year. But in September of 19, it was. So the data that I'm sharing with you is the number of people, the number of absences during that month, and then the percentage of unfilled substitutes. And this is just classroom, this is instructional personnel. So our rate in 1920 was 4.83. Last year, with kind of COVID situation that we had an unfilled substitute rate of 7.76. Now, if you look at this year, we're at 27.18. It's a combination of not having people to sub, and you can see we've had some people out. But it's really more about not having the people available. And again, when you see 27.18, we still have children in school, and we have classes to cover. So we have teachers covering for one another, we have paras jumping in, we have volunteers, we have principals, whoever it is to come in and help to make sure that in-person instruction can continue as effectively as possible. So, You heard us talk a little bit about the governor's money, and we have a proposal that we're going to explain to you in just a moment. But when we had a meeting earlier with the governor's representatives, and he was just checking in on how things were going, his question to us was, do you have your teaching positions filled? Because we have also a teaching crisis, a teacher shortage crisis in our state. And most of us said yes, but what our real crisis was across the state was really in that operational funding. The other crisis that we described to the governor was the quarantine, the lack of testing availability to families and students, and the quarantine requirements that were sometimes and often sending children and staff home that did not have COVID, but had symptoms, and so they had to stay home or take a test. And by the time we got testing results, often it was towards the end of the quarantine. So the governor worked, and his people worked with the Department of Health and Welfare, and they also have a grant that was available to school districts. We applied not knowing the specifics, and so we just found out really last week what that number was going to be. So we know that there is also a crisis in our healthcare situation. So while we don't have an exact plan yet, we are working with some of our internal folks with the possibility of including our health professionals, our students who are studying to become doctors and nurses and CNAs and all of those sort of things. And maybe they could help us be a part of those solutions. So there's some early planning that's being done. We have a meeting again on Thursday to finalize that, but we thought we could take that money and reinvest it in our own people and our students to help give them some of the internship hours that have been hard for them to get because of some of the COVID restrictions that exist. So more to come on that, but that's kind of hot off the presses as far as testing. I would reiterate that we would continue with this kind of volunteer testing process that, and our hope would be that we would be able to get access to rapid tests. So instead of waiting 3 to 5 to 7 days for results, we could, if a child or a staff member had some sort of symptoms, test them, offer that rapid test to them. So that is our hope within our plan. So we can get immediate results and act on those results. And this is just a menu of options. So more to come on that, but I wanted to make sure that you were aware. And as you know, we've had a long history of being early adopters and making tests available to families and staff. Yes.
That people understand that we will not be forcing children to take these tests.
Absolutely
We will require parental permission.
Absolutely, absolutely. And even with our own staff, it's been, offered. Most people will take us up on that because they don't want to have to quarantine for the, 10 days or more. But obviously it's an individual choice. And we would continue that. So I'm actually going to ask Dave Reinhardt to talk a little bit more about the grant that Governor Little provided to school districts. I'm going to turn this over to him.
Thank you, Wendy. Chairman Grant, members of the board. You've heard plenty tonight about the obvious need we have for substitutes and our operations team. You've also heard about Governor Little's grant. He had heard from superintendents that we need substitute teachers and we need child nutrition staff, we need transportation staff. And so some of that money is now becoming available to us. What is before you is a plan to use that money effectively to retain, and we're not making any pretensions about thinking that there's going to be, droves of people signing up for any of the positions because of a few bucks. We think the issues are deeper than that, but we do want to thank people, but we also want to make sure that our substitutes stay with us for the year, that our child nutrition staff stays with us through the year, and that we continue to remain competitive. On the left, you'll see our plan in this update for the use of substitute teachers and those teachers who substitute. So those would be classroom teachers who actually take their prep or take on extra students. But you'll see that $70 is what we're paying until recently. $70, we weren't even tied for last. We were dead last. And $90 makes us competitive within the Treasure Valley. We had a plan for a couple of years now that you had approved that if a substitute help us for 10 days a month, that they receive $50. We're proposing to raise that to $100. We also advertise this position as a position that is part-time, that works with people's schedules. And so we appreciate those staff that give us 1 day a week. And what you see in those next two bullets is really just saying to people, thank you for helping us 1 day a week. We know you have other things happening. And finally, in that side, we're thanking the teachers who take their preparation period or who take on extra students and saying to them that if you take on extra students, that daily rate is $100. If you divide a class, it's $50, and then to give them a bonus of $50 if they take on 5 periods in a month. So really that left column is us just saying, thank you, everyone. We're trying to increase the rate for substitutes. That's going to cost us about $120,000. So that really takes, a good chunk of what the governor originally intended for substitutes and operations staff. He called it a substitutes plan, substitutes recruitment grant. But then he went on to spell out operations too. So on the right, you'll see a plan to help with our operations team. Drivers, we've had to cancel a couple of routes since we were last together. We have just the right amount of drivers, but if a couple of them get sick, we really struggle. We've had maintenance staff out driving, we've had dispatchers out driving, and that starts to become an issue. And so we're proposing that they also receive some money halfway through the year. Thank you for helping us this half, some money at the end. We're proposing $500 and $300. What's the magic about $500 and $300? Last year, our teachers had negotiated an $800 retention amount that comes at Christmas. That was a part of some of the governor's funding to return their pay raises or to return the pay scale to normal because we had froze that. So that $800 represents that. So we decided rather than some staff getting 1,000 and some people getting 500 or any kind of combination of that, we just thought it best to treat all staff the same. And so we're proposing, that's why the repetition of $500 and $300, that those full-time staff would receive that amount at those moments. The sources for this revenue, if you think back a couple of presentations ago, when Wendy presented the fact that we received a grant for $1.2 million for connectivity, for technology, that ended up saving $310,000 that we had taken from ESSER to supplement some Chromebook purchases. So that now freed that up. The 182 is from the governor's grant to recruit substitutes and operations staff. So we believe that we can do this without touching the general fund. We believe that this is a good use of money to thank and to keep good people with our kids and in the classrooms. And I stand for any questions on any of this.
About the substitute rate.
Sure.
Just digging a little deeper. If we
Sure.
raise to 90, where does that put us with the other districts in this valley?
That's a great question. And off the top of my head, what I would say is about equal. Every district calculates it a little different. Some districts will say if you're subbing for a classified staff person, you get this amount. If you're substituting for a certified teacher, you get this amount. Or if you are yourself certified, we'll pay you $100. If you are not certified, we'll give you $80. We have, as a district, when I came, it was $60 a day. We've tended to just treat everybody the same as an approach. So I can't answer it directly, but I'd say we're in the ballpark.
Fine with that. I just want to make sure that, if we're doing it, that we're doing it correctly and that we don't put ourselves at the bottom again.
Yes.
Difference on who we attract as substitutes.
Absolutely. And we're grateful. The lion's share of our substitute teachers are local moms and dads who, rather than maybe getting $5 or $10 more in Meridian, they maybe have kids in our schools. They live in a subdivision here and they just prefer stay here and stay in our schools. The other thing that's not there is currently if you sub for one teacher, say maternity leave, 10 or more days, you get $90. We're going to raise that from 90 to 110. So that's for teachers. That's because they're doing lesson planning. They might be with that group of students for 2 months. And so they'd get $110 a day.
Another question on the daily rate for teachers. We've never offered this for teachers before. Is that correct? The $100 if they have to go and sub at a different classroom during their prep time?
Yeah, we had a calculation, a nominal calculation where a teacher would, if they would take their prep, we would take the $70 and divide it, and it really became a pretty small amount. This gives it, to the point of a teacher that takes their prep is going to make $25. So they're not making a lot, but we were told today in negotiations, and Trustee MacArthur was there, that a lot of new teachers look forward to $25 extra in their paycheck. And so we try to incentivize it some, and it is an increase. That being said, 27% of our classes are not being filled by subs. We're at a crisis. This really is a crisis level. And we're deeply concerned about it. We're going to keep an eye on this. Our substitutes appreciate that we'll do anything for them. But it's hard work.
One of the things that's good is that it used to be that when you would sub, you were making like $8 an hour or something. And I mean, that's not grown-up money. That's practically babysitting fees, but you've got 10 times as many children. But now with it being the $90 a day, it's like $13.85 based on a 6.5-hour day, which I think is about what subs work. So I think that is moving into way more reasonable territory. But then really, if you factor in the bonuses that they can get between now and Christmas, I mean, that's significant. That's, I think another thing that we should maybe consider doing is, I know that there are a handful of them that already do, but really push maybe getting kids that are home from college for a semester, get them in there. Doing that, especially if they're interested in education, it's a career.
That's good input. That has helped us in the past with that kind of month and a half gap. We have had some.
That becomes real money for them that they could be making. When I figured it out at our meeting earlier today, if they were to qualify for all of the bonuses between now and Christmas, it ends up being about $23 an hour. That is crazy good money for a college student.
Yeah. So thank you. Thank you, trustees.
That is the item, an action item for you to consider, is that portion of the update, which is how we would use the incentive funds and then use some of our COVID relief funds.
Do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion to accept Governor Little's incentive money for our substitute and operational expense relief funds.
Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
All in favor, Russ? I'm sorry.
I don't think that's quite enough.
Yeah, I think we might need a little more.
Okay.
So keep
Could
going.
you say it then? You do it.
Well,
Let me turn the microphone.
and I might not be wording it correctly either, but I think we need to move to adopt the governor's relief money, but also to adopt the operational plan as it's been presented to us. So that would be the motion I would make.
And I'll second that one.
All in
Sounds
favor?
way better coming
Russ?
from a lawyer.
Aye. Sally?
Aye.
Kim?
Aye.
Joy?
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. Okay. Now, we get to have an update from Vice Chairman Thomas on the school district impact fees.
So just a little bit of history for those who don't know. Back in 2017, when we ran our bond, we heard a lot from our constituents that they wanted some sort of relief. They were feeling burdened by carrying all of that tax burden. And so giving credit to where credit's due, Adam, our finance guy at the time, set out to find a way to do that. And he came up with this elaborate formula of how we could get some impact fees. And we took it to the ISBA general body and they said, no way. We don't understand that, no way. So we tried to make it a little simpler, and Adam found that it was as simple as adding school districts to the current impact fee language. And so then our board put out a resolution that was still not accepted by the ISBA because they didn't understand what an impact fee was. So we set about educating people. And last year at our convention in November, they finally approved a resolution to add school districts to impact fees. And what that does is it allows ISBA to then lobby legislators to get that done. And so last year, there were some conversations with different legislators. It started to gain some momentum, and then the session ended. Our person that deals with the legislature at ISBA, Quinn, has not given up. A couple of weeks ago, I attended a meeting with several different people, but there were a couple of legislators there who are willing to carry the language to get this taken care of. And hopefully we'll be able to do that. I know there's some talks with the builders because of course impact fees affect the builders because they pay the impact fee up front and then they have to regain that back from the buyers. But what we've been told, they did a case study with 4 different districts, Kuna being one of them, and they have a great presentation that they're going to be able to give to the legislators to be able to explain how it can work and how it can benefit our communities by, you can't use impact fees to make things better, but you can use them to make them stay the same. So we would be able to bond for a new school, say a new school, but use the impact fees to pay that instead of having to use property tax to pay those bond payments. So about 50 to 60% of those bonds could be paid by impact fees, which is exciting. But I just wanted to update everybody and let you know that it's not dead. We're still working on it. And hopefully this legislative session, which starts in January, we'll be able to get this done and have school districts added to the language of impact fees. We may call on people to talk to our legislators and encourage them to vote for them, but right now it's looking very positive.
Joy, that is so exciting. I have to tell you, as I was listening to Michael Keith's presentation about the capital plan, I kept thinking, you see these huge growth and everything. I was thinking, oh my gosh, we are just not taking advantage of, we still have to build a school for all these people moving in, but we're not taking advantage of the opportunity to collect those impact fees. And we're just passing it on to the people that have lived here for so long. And though I know their tax rates, we've set that so that it doesn't change too much. Their house values are going up. So,
and of the 4 districts that they did case studies on, one was West Ada, one was us, one was Coeur d'Alene, and the other one was in eastern Idaho. No, it was Bonneville. They are projecting that in the next 10 years, Kuna will have almost 4,000 more students. And
that seems low to me, but it does. That
right,
still,
yeah.
it's just, It is
But-
a lot. It's doubling us almost, but.
But also a good thing that they did discover is of those 4 districts, Kuna does have the best capacity they have more capacity. So we can fit more students in than other districts. We're not as busting at the seams. But it was a fascinating presentation.
Yeah, I would look forward to seeing that.
I can forward
think
that
it's
to you.
really exciting news. Thank
Yeah.
you for sticking with it.
Well, so if it doesn't get accomplished this year in the legislative session, I'll be coming back to you to support another resolution because those have to be approved every 2 years. So,
Another resolution can we still do the ISBA resolutions as well?
yeah, we would do it next year so that ISBA has, and I'll explain that when we get to the next part, but resolutions are good for 2 years. They can work on the same resolution for 2 years and then you have to rerun it as another resolution, so.
It'll be really interesting to see how some of the school districts that were like, well, we're not experiencing growth, so we don't really want to vote for it. It'll be interesting as growth continues to come, if all of a sudden their tune will change.
It's true.
Yeah, thanks for all your work, Trustee Thomas. New business, financial statements, Morgan Browning with Ide Bailey and Manager Feather. Looks like Scott Phillips. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate the time to come and present the exciting highlights of the audit report. El Mary said I had to keep it under 2 hours, so I'll do my best. Just kidding. We'll just hit the highlights. So as we scroll down to the next page, this is our audit opinion on the financial statements. It's what we call a qualified opinion. If you scroll kind of the top of page 2, so just scroll up a little bit, right there. So what we have is we have a qualification, which is there's one element of the financial statements that's missing, and this is something that's been a strategic decision by the district to leave out a post-employment employee or a post-employment benefit off the financial statements. And the reason for that is because it would take some money to hire an actuary to make that determination, and they determined that the cost outweighed the benefit of doing that. So they left that off. And that's consistent with prior years. That's been happening for a long time. But other than that piece, we believe that the financial statements are materially correct and accurate as it relates to the accounting standards and presenting the financial position of the district. If you scroll down just a little bit on that same page, there's you'll see kind of in the middle now or toward the bottom, an emphasis of a matter paragraph. I'll cover that in a little bit more detail, but there was a change in accounting standards. They're ever evolving. And so there's a change in accounting standards this year that said that the student activity funds, in other words, your ASBs, had to be brought onto the financial statements. And so they are now integrated in the financial statements. Whereas before you just presented kind of an ending cash balance, but now you're actually presenting the ins and the outs of, all those ASB activities. Going to page, 4. So down a couple of pages. This first section is called the management discussion and analysis. It actually gives some highlights and talks about the significant changes between years. And so it's a great comparative to really see what happened during the year. If you look at, I'll just kind of hit those 4 bullet points briefly, which is the district improved their financial position by $6.6 million, primarily related to CARES Act funding. Also, you completed the construction during the year and spent $32 million, almost $33 million in the construction. And again, we talked about the CARES Act funding. And then also there was, in that last bullet, there was a refunding of the bonds. In other words, kind of basically like a refinance, which has a future cash flow savings of nearly $1.7 million. So those are kind of the highlights during the year. If you scroll down to page 10, there's actually 2 sets of financial statements in here. This is the first set, which includes your long-term debt activity, your capital asset activity, so the buildings and the schools. And so that's what this financial statement presents. And if you scroll down just a little bit at the bottom of this, you can see that your net position, that's kind of the ending, when you take all your assets minus your liabilities, you have a net position of $34 million, $34.6 million. But in reality, most of that is tied up in the net investment in capital assets. So $20 million is in your capital assets. The rest is restricted for primarily debt service. So if you look at the unrestricted line item, it's $32,000. So not very much when you paint the full picture. The one thing that you could, I won't say add back, but take into consideration is near the bottom of the liabilities, there's a net pension liability of $16 million. That liability is for basically Percy, and it's for future. If Percy were to shut out today, that's the check you'd have to get, but really that'll be funded in future flows as people retire. So that really is available for kind of current spending, so to speak. If you scroll down a couple of more pages to page 12, so we're down one more page right here. If you stop right there, this is the balance sheet, and this is the second set of financial statements, and it's closer to a cash basis financial statements, closer to how you budget. And if you look at the bottom, kind of bottom left corner, the unassigned fund balance, $5.6 million. And then the fund balance, that's in the general fund. So you have about $5.6 million of basically available resources, mostly cash and investments, and some amounts that were going to be received in the near term. That's what's available. And if you compare that to, if you go down a couple of more pages, if you compare that amount to, if you go down a little bit to the next page, and right there, your total expenditures in the general fund are about $34 million. So you have about $5.6 million. We normally recommend for a healthy fund balance, healthy kind of cash position, is around 5 to 10% of your expenditures. And so 5.6 million divided by the 34 million comes out to about 16%. So very strong, healthy fund balance. You've normally been close to that 10% range and kind of been that upper end of the healthy range. Again, this year with all the extra CARES Act funding, paying for various costs, that's what's put you in a situation where you've got a stronger position this year. Most of the disclosures are basically the same as prior years, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through those in detail. But if you went to page 45, this is a new disclosure that again kind of talks about the impact of bringing on those student body activities. And the rest of that is an exciting read also, so don't skip all that. But anyway, so right here, this shows that in this year of adoption, we brought on, $546,000 of cash. Also if you looked at your, those financial statements that are broken out into different columns, in the non-major fund column, so not in your general fund, we present those activities, and it's just a little bit less than $1 million. So you have, and its revenues expenses are pretty close to each other, but you have an extra $1 million of activity in addition to an extra, $500,000 cash balance that's sitting in there. So, again, let me know if you have any questions. Going into the last couple of pages here, page 51. This is a report on internal controls. So this is basically, we don't give an opinion on how your processes work and how functional they are. But we do, if anything comes to our attention, we would report that in here in terms of the checks and balances, the flows. And so we did have one finding, which is kind of, it's a repeat from last year, and I'll cover that in kind of the last page, we detail it out. But we're just basically, as auditors, we're very involved in the financial statements and had some adjustments that we made to the financial statements. And so we have what we call material weakness for that level of involvement. If you go down a couple more pages, one more page. Yep.
What's your recommendation on how to fix that? Or is that, you just show the error and?
So here's, Elmira and I have talked about that. And what we're going to do is try to do an educational plan with Elmira, getting up to speed with the details of financial reporting. Elmira does a great job when it comes to budgeting, cash flow, cash in and out. But as you can see, these financial statements reflect a lot more than just those budgeted components. And so we're going to go through an education plan to try and help get up to speed with all the details of what is involved in this as part of her preparation process. And then just trying to have more care if there's an adjustment for, kind of ending receivable amounts that are due to the district or owed from the district.
Thanks. And what page did you say to go to now?
So now I'm on page 53. This is an opinion on compliance. In addition to our audit of the financial statements, we also audit compliance with federal programs to make sure that you complied in all material respects with the compliance requirements. And in this case, we did give a clean opinion, an unmodified opinion that we believe that you complied in all material specs with the financial programs, which is really good, especially this year because you had a lot of new programs and new funding. So it was significant, and I'll show that here in just a couple of pages. If you scroll down to page 55, this is your federal expenditures for this year. And if you scroll down just a little bit more and see the bottom, you had about $8 million in federal expenditures. For comparison, the last couple of years, you've had about $3.7 million. So you more than doubled your federal expenditures. That mostly comes from, in the middle, there's a Educational Stabilization Fund, the ESSER funds are 1.5 million. The Coronavirus Relief Fund is $2 million. And then also your summer food service program, which means that you were just paying for all of the food service, was up about $600,000 or $700,000. So you more than doubled it, and we had additional programs we had to test related to that. But all the compliance came out right on. And then if you go to the kind of the last page, this is, if you go all the way down to the very last page, this is in more detail what that finding was. Again, that our involvement in helping prepare these, financial statements. The only other thing to cover is there was one item that we call a past adjustment. In other words, adjustment that we did not make to the financial statements because we didn't believe it was material. Actually, it was management's decision to not post it, but it's common, which is in your local government investment pool where you keep kind of your excess cash, you're actually required to mark that to fair value. They don't transact it for fair value, they transact as a dollar, so you just kind of kept it at cost. And it was about $35,000, so it was really a minor amount, but enough that we felt like we need to bring that to your attention. So, but again, it's common if it's not significant for school districts and other municipalities to not post that. But again, the accounting guidance would say that you should. So with that, open it up for any questions that you have. I know that was kind of a fast version, but just open up for any questions you have.
You like that fast version? No, really, I do feel like it was pretty clear. I appreciate that. Clear that I can understand it. I always like that.
Scott, you do a good job. Good timing. It's clear. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And if you have any other questions, after the fact, happy to take any questions at any time and walk through anything that you're interested in. It's my passion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll make a motion that we accept the financial statement as presented to us.
Do we have a
I'll
second?
second.
All in favor, Russ? Aye. Sally?
Aye.
Kim?
Aye.
Joy?
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. Okay, so moving on to the ISBA resolution, Vice President Chairman Thomas.
So this is the time of year when we look at the resolutions that have come to us from ISBA that we will be voting on at our business session at the convention this year, which hopefully they're having a meeting right now to decide if we stay in person. So I do want to tell you a little bit of the procedure that happens here. School districts come up with a resolution. They submit it to Idaho School Board Association. We have a committee for resolutions that I sit on as a member of the executive board. And we go through those. If there's any questions or they're not really clear, then we go back to the school district and have them clarify those things. Then at our September meeting, we have the school districts appear virtually and explain the reasoning behind these resolutions, and then we vote whether we should send it to the floor with a do pass or a do not pass recommendation. So this year, it says 9 on this list, but there actually are only 8 because Caldwell School District pulled one of theirs. So we're going to talk about these, and then we'll decide how we want to vote as a board so that we know when we get to convention how to divide up the votes. Every single one of these received a do pass recommendation from the executive board. And I think that the business session is going to be super short. So the first one is the career ladder placement of out-of-state teachers and administrators. The issue that they were seeing is that teachers that come from out of state, if they're not is it the Danielson model, then they get placed lower on the career ladder, and it's not really fair way to do it. And so they're just asking that they adjust the career ladder and allow us to place them where they should be placed. That's going to help districts, especially districts that are on the borders with Washington and Nevada, because they can, in Oregon, so that they can be paid what they're closer to what they're being paid over there. So if you have a question, great. If you don't.
No, I think it's a great way to to allow them to get the teachers they need.
Yeah.
Because, to be competitive with those around. So.
I don't know if you want to each.
Well, I just have a question about that. If they take the Danielson model out, that would be for the whole state, for everybody?
I don't think they're going to take the Danielson model out.
It's just that they can just replace them where
they can't use that against somebody that's coming from another state that's not been evaluated on that. They can't use that against them when they're placing them on the career ladder.
Okay.
Is how I understand it. Correct, Wendy?
Is that correct? Okay.
So,
It's just common sense.
right?
I mean, it really is just common sense.
So everybody want to tell me how they would vote on that?
I would vote in favor of it.
I do
Yeah.
too.
Russ?
Yeah, I don't have any concern.
Okay. Then the next one, resolution number 2, is a hiring flexibility on licensed counselors. Bonneville School District appeared before us and they did an amazing job, and I in no way can repeat what he said, explaining to us what the reasoning behind this. Wendy, do you have a little bit of insight that you can share? Oh, I'm sorry. From what I understand. Oh, okay, go ahead.
What we've been doing in our school district, we have been using social workers to provide, especially in our elementary setting, being able to provide services to children. They're licensed to be counselors.
Right.
But a lot of the services, for example, that we use in Kuna are helping to connect families to resources. They just, for us, serve a kind of a bigger picture in the elementary setting to connect to resources. So it allows an expansion of that definition for counselors, for social workers.
Come into the school district.
Yeah.
As an
And to
employee.
provide services.
Correct.
Was this what we talked about a couple years ago, where it basically made it so that children didn't have to leave school to go to counselors, but that the counselors were in the schools and were able to provide those services?
Those are contracted services currently. Agencies, and it's families, that we kind of give them the opportunity to receive those services without missing school in our school day. So this is different. Currently, social workers are classified as like ancillary staff, certified staff, but this would give them kind of the same standing as our school counselors. In Kuna, we currently practice this. It would just help us placement on the salary schedule and some of those things too.
So it allows them.
They did a great job, and I can't repeat what they did, but.
So it allows school districts to better serve their kids depending on the school district. It allows them more freedom and flexibility is what it's doing.
Yep.
Yes.
Again, common sense. I
Right.
mean, why wouldn't you connect them to the resources available to them?
Exactly.
So, yeah, sounds like a great thing.
I would agree.
Russ?
Yeah, I'm fine as well.
Jaden? Okay. So then the next one came from Caldwell School District. They've been trying to accomplish this for a while. This is a repeat. So it's one that was up 2 years ago. We all voted for it. I believe it was unanimous, which never happens. So, but this just increases, currently kids can drop out of school at age 16. This makes it so that they have to stay until they turn 18 or they graduate, whichever comes first.
So I have a question on this. Why did it get kicked back? Was it because COVID and it's shortened, like, was it?
Kicked back to what, 16?
No.
Oh.
Why did it come back again? It got
Oh, because-
approved unanimously, but then
Sure.
the legislature didn't pick it up.
So
But why
after,
didn't they pick it up?
okay,
Do you
so,
know?
so after the process of us voting in November, and if you'll recall the last 2 years, there's been a lot of resolutions.
It's true.
So the executive board has a committee called the GAC, the governmental, it's the group that tells Quinn what she's supposed to focus on. And so in reality, Quinn can really only push for 5 or 6 resolutions at a time. So the GAC's job is to take these resolutions and say, okay, here's what our priorities are. And there's just been bigger priorities but they still want this to be part of it. So that's why Caldwell's bringing it back.
Well, I'm glad they're bringing it back.
Yeah.
I think it's great. I mean, talk about improving go-on numbers. I mean, if we can keep these kids in school and get them graduated,
Right.
that'll definitely help.
I'm not sure how you force a kid if they don't come to school after 6 or, how do you force a kid to go to school if they're not going to come to school till they're 18?
It's a legal thing, I think. I think that it makes it so that the law enforcement can enforce a child to be attending some, and it falls on the parents, really.
I mean, I'm all about education, obviously, but in some extreme cases, if someone's 16 or older and they have to drop out because they have to start working to provide,
And it does allow for kids to still graduate early. It does allow for them, it says 18 or until graduation, whichever comes first. So if those kids want to leave school at 16, then graduate at 16 is what they're saying.
I'm just going to say this. I mean, obviously, you can't force anybody to do anything. But, and I've talked to my own kids about this too. When you're 16 and some rancher comes to you and says, I'll give you $25,000 to come and work for me full time or whatever, like you see nothing but dollar signs because, wow, that's so much money. But when you are now 25 years old, you realize I can't buy a house with that. I can't support a family with that. Reality sets in. But now it's too late to go back and really fix that. So I think that helping kids to stay focused, no, don't get discouraged. Don't get, just finish this up, finish this goal. And then it really does open a lot more doors to them. Even if it's just their GED, it opens so many more doors to them. And they can't get swayed by that easy money as easily, I think it's a great idea because I do see so many times kids just think, oh, $30,000. Yes, please. And they're willing to blow up their goals because they want that immediate money. And so I think that this would help with that problem.
Okay, so how would you vote, Russ?
I don't have really a concern with with this. I've never really understood, and I guess the whereas that talks about you have to earn math credits during the 12th grade. I've never really understood that. And some of my own kids have been in situations, but that's not really material to this question. So I guess that's a discussion for another day. So I don't have a real concern about it, but I've never understood why that's so important and so special.
You don't like math, huh?
No, I don't understand why it matters if they fulfill the requirements before their senior year.
Right.
Why do we require them to take a math class their senior year? It really has never made sense to me, and it doesn't really. I just don't understand it, and maybe somebody could explain it to me. So
A couple of weeks ago, I toured Swan Falls High School with Deb Critchfield. She's running for state superintendent, and we discussed the fact that the graduation requirements really do need to be looked at again. So that's that kind of conversation. But this is about age of accountability. So how would you vote on that then, Russ?
no, as I said, I think that's a discussion for another day. So
No, I mean on this resolution for
Right.
So as it is, do you like it or?
Well, I think it's fine. I mean, the whereas doesn't really have any legal effect. It just
No.
states what the
Right,
law is. So,
right.
So that's fine.
Okay. Sally?
I'm
for it. JD?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
I think Russ wanted to say something.
I think just in general, I think it's better this year that we do only have the 8. I remember 2 years ago, I think we had 22 of them
Uh-huh.
or something. And it was, and with that understanding that Quinn can only work on probably 5 or 6, I have been a little bit, I don't know what the word is. I don't know that we're as effective as we could be because I think there's a scattered focus a little bit.
So
And
many
I think that we have tried to address that issue as a board, the executive board, by creating the resolution committee, because we actually looked at 15 of them. And when we talked to the districts, a lot of them pulled them. And they said they'd come back with a better one. So I think we're trying to get to that point. When we get to number 9, I'll explain something else to you that will make more sense.
For the most part, the wording on the resolutions has been much
better.
improved
Yeah.
as some of the
Because we've
language
gone
that we
back to
had
some of them
in
and said,
some of those, but-
come on now, fix this. Okay, so number 4 was pulled by Caldwell School District because it was going to open a can of worms we did not want opened. Number 5 is the support of Idaho's content standards. This is not necessarily something that we want Quinn to go out and do legislatively. We just want to make a statement to whoever it is that needs to hear it, that we support the process that the state board goes through to come up with our standards, and that we support those standards as written.
I say yes.
Yeah, I don't have any
So-
concern for it. It's so general that it doesn't
All we're
really
doing
do
is saying
anything.
that
but-
we endorse the board who comes up with the standards, is basically all we're saying.
Well, and again, there's a process there.
Right, so we're saying we agree with the process.
Yes.
Okay.
That's what we're saying.
Then I'll say yes.
Sally?
It just doesn't seem worth voting on. Like, why isn't this one stricken? It's just, I don't know. But
Because last year in the legislative session, there was a very strong push to just get rid of all of our standards and start all over again. And that would have been chaotic for a lot of reasons. One of which being that we would have to adopt all new curriculum and we would have to go through all of the processes again. And so in later next month, I'm going to be participating in the in a committee that we look at every single question on, we're going to do language arts and math this year, those tests, to make sure that they are appropriate for Idaho kids. it's called the Sensitivity Committee. And so all of that stuff is looked at very closely to make sure that it's appropriate for our kiddos, not just for kids that age, but kids in Idaho of that age. And so that's just one piece of the process that they go through to get standards.
Well, I certainly appreciate the fact that we're not going to reinvent the wheel, because that just means billions of dollars wasted. So
it's true.
That I'm for. So I will say yes.
Okay. Not specified. Yes. Okay, so I don't know what you've heard, but there are two legislators Wendy Horman and Senator Den Hartog, who are going to bring back their funding formula that they attempted to get through a couple of years ago. And so this is trying to make sure that
we don't run into the same issues.
Yes,
like we
and
had
that
before.
it continues to be as see-through as possible, as transparent as possible, because the one that they tried to bring through, none of us could understand. So,
and fair to each district.
Exactly.
I mean, before it
Exactly.
wasn't as fair to the districts.
And also, this was one that it was expiring this year. This resolution was expiring this year. It was one that came 2 years ago, so we're re-voting on this one.
So are you saying that these two senators are probably going to be bringing back the same thing? Is that what you're saying? And so this is to take a look
That's
at
what we've
that.
been told.
Okay.
Mhm. So this is just to support transparency and make it as easy as possible and as fair as possible. I don't think anybody would say no to that, but I could be wrong.
No, I agree. It needs this to help us.
Okay.
Not that I'm opposed to a new formula principle and process, but that one was a little bit crazy.
So shall we vote on this one?
I'll say yes.
Russ?
Oh, I thought this is still on 6?
Yeah.
Yeah, 6.
Yeah, that's fine.
I'll say yes.
Okay, number 7. This is interesting. So I don't know, was it last legislative session that they made the new rule that all of our career ladder information had to be transported, not electronically, but by paper, to the state board, and that this state department, and they were to keep it all on hand. And they weren't doing it. And so just recently they put out a call to all the districts to get all that information. And districts like Boise, it was going to take them like 4 months to get all of that stuff put together and sent over to them. The State Department doesn't want to have to keep all of that stuff on paper. So they're just saying, hey, let us keep the way we've been doing it and let the districts keep the paper form and make it easier on everybody. No, we don't need to have all that information in quadruplicate.
No words.
Right?
I mean, when you need to search for something, you can type in a person's name and pull up everything you want to know, or you can go into a vault and try and find it in a stack of papers in a box someplace in a corner. I don't understand that. It's just, I think they must have some kind of like a
vendetta
stock in lumber.
It was a law that was in place and it's old. And it was out of the blue that we were told that we needed to comply with sending all of our records to the State Department. And that caused every school district to go, what are you doing? All transcripts, all evaluations, all of that, which would mean duplicating what we already do. And so I don't know how that from behind the scenes, this came up as a compliance issue that wasn't being followed. If somebody, like you said, Trustee MacArthur found it and went, why aren't we doing this or what? But at least this would allow our continuing practices of us, local school districts, storing all of that information. And we have an audit process that the state department conducts on behalf of, or the state board conducts to make sure that we're following the protocols. So this would keep that process in place.
I said keep it simple.
Oh, absolutely.
So I'll say yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so the next resolution is just to simply, we voted on it 2 years ago, it's expiring, it's back, and it's just to allow us to discuss the sale of public property in executive session. The purpose of that is if we go into executives, if we have to talk about it not in executive session and we say, well, this is the lowest number we'll go for, somebody may have bid 20,000 more, but now they're going to go, oh, well, we don't have to pay that much because they'll take this. So that's the whole purpose of this, is to allow us to discuss that in executive session, and then be able to benefit from that.
This is another one that just makes sense to me.
Common sense.
Yeah.
It just does.
For flexibility.
Yeah.
We're still going to talk about it in the meeting, and it's still going to be public record, and it's still going to be voted on in front of the public.
Right.
But it allows flexibility to discuss it beforehand.
Exactly. So,
Oh, yes, definitely.
Yes.
okay. So this last one is one that is brought to you by the executive board. And what we're doing, it came from the committee, the resolution committee. We would like to create this. It's not something that Quinn would have to act on. It's just guidance for the GAC committee. What it does is it lists, and is this it? Yeah, if you'll scroll up a little bit, those 4 things are things that come up all the time in resolutions. So things that we have approved and they come back, we want to keep a document that says, these are the things that we already keep in mind when we're going to the legislature. And that will, eliminate the need for several different resolutions. It will give clear, concise guidance to the GAC committee as far as what is a priority already, in addition to anything that came new this year. But this allows us to eliminate some of those repeat resolutions. Our intent is that when this comes back up for election in 2 years, which it will, if anything has been showing up consistently over the last we're looking at the last 6 to 8 years, things that come up regularly. If something else is starting to come up regularly, we will make sure it gets put on this. So this is a living document that will change as needed every 2 years.
Do we have to vote on it still every 2 years? Or
Well,
just-
yeah, so we'll vote on it now as is, as these are the things that we feel are most important. Then in 2 years, if anything needs to be taken off or added, we can do that when we have to vote again for it. Do you know what I mean? Because you have to vote every 2 years for a resolution to stay active.
So in other words,
Yeah.
to keep it a living document, it might have some changes every 2 years. We'll be
Correct.
taking a look at it.
Yeah, the concern from the board, the executive board, was that this was going to tie other boards to certain things, which it won't if we keep it a living document and change things as they appear and become relevant.
But does this go to the legislature?
No,
That's
so
what I was
this
guessing.
just,
Okay.
this just will guide the governmental committee in their decisions and help Quinn with guidance. And it just is very, clear cut. These are the things that are very important to our organization as a whole. And they will be changed as needed.
So it's basically for the ISBA board.
Yeah, yes.
And not a,
And-
they're going to take.
And so this is,
Governing body.
right, so this is coming from the executive board as a resolution from us on the board. And it has a do pass recommendation because we are willing to accept these things as what are important to our general membership if it's
They're
voted
going to
for.
be willing to add and subtract
Yes.
as we find
Yes.
the sweet spot.
Exactly. I mean, in 5 years, there may be, or 6 years, there may be something that has become more relevant than something else.
Sure.
And that way we have that flexibility of changing it every 2 years.
I'm fine with it.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Okay, so I guess now we just need a motion to approve our decisions and use this as a guide in our voting for our business session in November.
So I have thoughts on that.
Okay?
Only that I think that's fine.
Mhm.
We've kind of talked about it and everything. However.
Unless something comes up in debate.
Exactly. That's what I was going to
Yes.
say. If for some reason I get persuaded for something, I would like to exercise my right to change my mind if I'm there.
Sure.
You know, I mean, one of us may not be there to hear that argument. So
Right.
then at that point, whatever we vote right now stands.
Right.
Okay.
So we need a motion, is that what you're saying?
Mhm.
That we approve what we decided on?
With flexibility to amend our vote.
Motion by Kim and Sally.
Sounds like Sally needs to make the motion. It sounds like Sally needs
to make the motion.
Oh. Well, I move to approve our decisions on the ISBA resolutions for 2022 with the caveat that we can change our vote if persuaded in the debate.
I will second that motion.
All in favor? Russ?
Aye.
Sally?
Yes.
Kim?
Yes.
Joy?
Yes.
Motion carries. Thank you. Okay. Superintendent Johnson, do you want to talk to us about K through 3 reading performance data?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman and trustees. Every year I present kind of how we're doing in regards to our student achievement data. And as you know, it's been a particular concern. It always is a concern to all of us, because it's the reason why we're here, is to make sure that our children are ready for their future. And this is really a report to you on kind of where we are when it comes to the reading proficiency of our K through 3 students. And I added some interesting data in regards to the impact of the pandemic on children when it comes to reading. So I've shared this information with you many times about what is our assessment tool and what are we required to do by the state. And then we also, in addition to the requirements, we use the tool called iStation, which is our assessment tool, to really have a thorough assessment process K through 5. And then we use a different tool in 6 through 9. So this is really about K through 3 and the effect of the pandemic. So our past goal, and currently we do not have an adopted strategic plan, so I'm just sharing our past goals. So we set a goal as a board to encourage that 80% of our third grade students would score proficient. We set that goal in 2015, not knowing that the tests would change and that we would have a global pandemic. But if you go to the next slide, Carelissa, this is where our third grade's proficiency, in other words, the number of students or the percentage of students that are at grade level. It's not where we want to be. We had a new test in the school year 18-19, so we were acclimating to that new assessment and those increased standards and requirements of students. And then we had the pandemic and we did not give a spring assessment. So it's kind of hard to see if we had some consistency with the new test with that next year. But if there's good news in this data, and none of us are satisfied with what we see here, however, I was predicting that 69% we were going to lose ground. And so some more data will kind of clarify that. So our teachers worked hard, and our students worked hard, and our families worked hard to keep our kids at least where they were historically. So that's proficiency. The other data that we look at, and you heard a little bit of this from over the years, is around growth. If you wouldn't mind going to the next slide. So we set a growth goal that our students would grow a minimum of 10% from fall to spring. And that's really because we know kids, especially right now, are kind of all over the place as far as their skill sets with reading, with listening, all of those kind of ELA skills, with their phonemic awareness, with letter sounds, that sort of thing. So here's by grade level how we are performing. So if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide. So I have kindergarten here, and you see that trend of kids increasingly becoming less prepared, which is another goal we'll talk about at another time. Some of the efforts around helping kids get a good start before they come to school. And then if we look at our growth goal, you can see when we invested in all day, everyday kindergarten as a growth. So this is growth fall to spring. If you would go to the next slide, we have the same information for first grade. And you kind of see a similar pattern with 1920 being kind of no data to see how we did. And then, I mean, our first grade teams are just, look at that. I mean, they're really making a huge impact on growth. And then here's grade 2 and their growth over time, and then grade 3. So we're definitely, for the most part, have been hitting that target and exceeding that target. I shared this information with you briefly last year with limited data. Typically, I don't share fall data with you other than in the context of that fall to spring, because fall is really giving teachers and administrators information on how well prepared their students are to benefit immediately from that grade level curriculum. So if I'm a first grade student, how ready am I in fall to benefit immediately? Or what sort of interventions need to be put into place so I can get to that grade level content quicker? And that's a way oversimplification of what we do. But this was the only data that we really have consistently to be able to compare to the state. If I'd just shown you spring data, I would have had like one point, and it really wouldn't have told you much. So I thought I'll at least share fall data because I have consistent fall data to share with you. So the impact of COVID. So in 1920, when we lost a quarter of our school year to COVID, the kids that were in kindergarten that year, this is what this means. So if you look at this as kind of a cohort set of data, so students who then last year were first graders in the fall, and then are currently sixth graders in the fall. And I look at this information and say, oh my heavens, our kindergarten first grade teachers did a lot of work to get the fall kiddos jumped up like that. If you go to the next set of data, so the kids that were first graders in 1920, they lost a quarter. Then in 2021, in the fall, didn't lose too much ground, so there was some work going on. And then are currently third graders. I would have expected that to have been lower, given the experiences that we've had. And comparing it to the state and comparing it to some of my colleagues' data in the Treasure Valley. So here's our second grade to fourth grade, or second grade, kids that were second graders in 1920, third graders last year, and then currently are fourth graders. And again, these are kids that are ready to benefit really for grade level curriculum. And then we have students who are third graders during the initial pandemic and are now fifth graders. So that's fall data. So real briefly, and I know normally we would have a conversation about this, I just put some takeaways along with my team. When I look at this data, here are some of my takeaways. Returning our students to in-person learning mattered. You heard Principal Misty Schmidt mention that with her data when she shared that. So when we got our little ones back to school earlier, we were one of the first ones to do that, and it was scary, but it mattered. Our teachers and staff, school staff, all of the ancillary staff around there they're working harder than ever to help students. The gap to close each year. So the gap is increasing every year. And so they're working harder to get them to where they were the year previous. You can see some of that pattern in the proficiency data. Students have some learning needs in order to best benefit from their grade level learning. That's a huge takeaway. Like, we know that, and I've seen that in action. Even today, I was in a second grade classroom, and a teacher was working with a second grader on skills that really would have been kindergarten skills, like OW sounds, right? That's not typically something you start with in second grade. So we've seen more gaps as a result of not even just our students who were here, but we've had a lot of people move in from other states that were in totally online last year, or they've had gaps in with quarantining and that sort of thing. I want to follow up on this other bullet, but some of the information, the initial information that we have is we believe our summer school helped keep kids in a learning mode, so that it helped keep some proficiency, helped keep some of our skills. And then 100% believe, and we don't have the data yet to show it because we just invested in it this year, is our investment in additional resources in the form of obviously curriculum that the community has helped us support. But this year we used our COVID resources to purchase, to invest in interventionists in all of our schools. And we've been seeing those interventionists in action as we've completed site visits this first quarter of school. So we're seeing the ability for us to act quicker and in both grade level standards for all students, and also filling the holes for some of the students and accelerating students. And this is in that kind of K-3 realm. So these are, again, some of my takeaways from the data. There would be a lot more if we dug in a little deeper, and I hope to do that in the future with all of you, and before it's almost 9 o'clock at night, so you're not too sleepy to take in the data. So I would answer any questions if you have them.
I don't have a question again, but this is a big concern of mine, especially with those younger kids. Some of them are in second and third grade and haven't really had good, strong reading programs. So I like the idea of the interventionist, and I'd like to see us maybe put some more money towards that, or look at that, what we can do, because those holes will only get bigger as they go through. I am surprised with the percentage. I thought it would be a lot lower. So I think that says something to our educational system and our parents who have helped through all of this. And I think it's important also that we're trying to keep kids in school for as long as we can, for as much as we can. It's really important, and I really want to make sure that we're trying to do that as much as we can. This is really concerning me. These kids deserve to have a good education, and I want to make sure that we're doing that. So this is a priority for me, and I'd like to see us maybe take a look at that and see what we can do with some funds or whatever.
One of the things that you'll see me do this year is continue to lobby for, right now we're using our early intervention money that we receive for students who aren't proficient to pay for all-day kindergarten. And then we have some support from our local community to do that. There was some talk last legislative session that the governor was interested in funding full-day kindergarten. If we could do that long-term, we could use those monies to provide additional intervention and acceleration for our students. And you know, I believe our investment in all-day kindergarten is a good start, but if we didn't have to use soft funds every year to pay for that, it would be even better because we could allocate those to additional support.
So it's interesting, this is just not a Kuna issue. I was reading some information from the State Department. This is a statewide issue.
And I believe that will be in many people's budgets this year because of the surplus that the state is experiencing right now. It's a great time to invest in those kindergarten kids. So I believe you'll see that again this session.
That would be great.
And if any of you would like to come and visit some schools and see some of the appropriations that you've given to us to dedicate to the interventionists and the structure to help support students to get them caught up or to accelerate their learning, I'd be happy to have you come see it in action. Because right now it seems, you know, without seeing it, it's hard to envision sometimes how it looks in action. So I'd be happy to share that with you.
What about the older children? We just saw through third grade, but is the learning loss, was it as great for older kids who were able to navigate computers a little better and handle hybrid a little better?
I have some anecdotal evidence right now because the unfortunate, we have our ISAT data. It's very hard to have actionable results from that data. So you invested in a data, an assessment tool with some of our COVID money called STAR in our middle school and high school intervention teams. And we won't have data to compare, but at least it lets us know where we are. And so I thought that would be something that I could share with you at the next meeting is like, okay, so we shared K through 3. Let's look at our intermediate and secondary students in ELA. And then I thought we could tackle math.
A great program, the STAR, because
Yeah.
it will take a child and tell you exactly where the holes are and the different standards that need to be
Yeah.
met. So it's really a good program.
Yeah.
I also like to see us, and I know summer school was hard this year. It's hard to find teachers.
Yeah.
They're burned out. But that's another thing is taking a look at not taking those 3 months off maybe
Yeah.
and doing some work through that so that they don't have that
Yeah.
large loss
Yeah, absolutely.
at summers. So that's just another thing I think that we need to take direction in.
Yep. Agreed. And, you know, we know from research that the most effective intervention is when it happens when we have them, you know, we use that time well, but we also know that we can prevent some loss, just, you know, typical not being in school loss, because maybe some students aren't in an enriching learning environment at home, that it really particularly helps those students from maybe they may not gain is what the research is telling us, but they don't lose, which is important. Yeah.
Important.
I mean, I know that it seems that especially with, they're trying to minimize the amount of work that kids take home after school, you know, for homework and such. I know there's a little bit more of that in high school, but I feel like, obviously, I am for summer school and for the intervention that can take place there, but I would love to see that intervention be a little more proactive all throughout the year. And that's one of the things that I just haven't seen or heard about as much of that happening. If there is like a learning loss or whatever, is there a way that we can engage parents right now to do a little one-on-one with their kids at home to try and help them catch up? I just haven't heard of programs like that, and I'm wondering, do we have those in place?
Part of the plan that's required by the state, and we have been doing it even before a requirement, is we provide this information to each individual parent. And, you know, what are we doing to help their student catch up or to help continue to push a student, because our goal is everybody grows. No matter if you're already proficient, you still continue to grow. And here are some things that you can do at home as a part of that plan. It's always a great idea to partner with parents, but we also know that we can't just depend on that alone, because there's some families that will do that and some families that will not. But we would never discourage that by any means.
We might have to be creative here for a while.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Kim was just from the audience heckling me. She was mentioning our get ready for school, get ready for learning in kindergarten program that Louis Vermas has been leading, and we've had a really great group of community members. That has really been focused on, before kids even enter school, because we know students have enriching homes, they are ready to benefit. You saw that kindergarten data, 30% are ready to benefit from kindergarten. We don't even have any impact on that because they're not our students until they walk in. So we're trying to even impact that.
Actually, when Trustee Thomas was talking about the surplus, I was thinking, don't start at kindergarten, throw it at the pre-K programs. But.
Yeah, and I will have this information because it was a separate goal of ours, but we saw some, again, continued amazing results, and it was in the 80 percentile of students who participated in that program last year were proficient when they came into the fall in kindergarten. So I'll give you the exact percentage in the next report.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so good of the order, ISB convention, November 17th through the 19th. Guess we'll find out soon if that's going to be in person or not.
I think it's going to stay in person, but like I said, they are deciding that as we speak.
School Board Candidate Forum, October 28th, 6:30 to 7:30 here in the KPAC. So that'll be fun. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Adjourn.
Yes.